She had always imagined her wedding day to be the happiest day of her life. A day where she would walk down the aisle, hand in hand with the man she loved, surrounded by family and friends, starting a new chapter in her life. It was supposed to be the beginning of forever, a dream come true, but in the blink of an eye everything changed. The accident happened on a regular Tuesday afternoon. She had been driving home from work, thinking about the wedding plans she had been tirelessly organizing for months. It was supposed to be a small ceremony, intimate but filled with all the love and joy she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. She had picked out her dress, a simple but elegant gown, and was looking forward to the moment when she would finally get to marry the man she adored. Then came the crash. The details were blurry. She remembered the screech of tires, the impact, and then nothing. When she woke up, everything was different. The sharp, unbearable pain in her body was the first clue that something was terribly wrong. But it was when the doctor came into the room, his face serious and his words careful, that she learned the devastating truth. She was paralyzed from the waist down. The life she had once known, the dreams she had held on to, were no longer attainable. In an instant, everything had been taken away. Her fiancé, the man she thought would stand by her no matter what, was there by her side in the hospital room, but his presence wasn't as comforting as she had hoped. He was trying, she could see that. But the look in his eyes, the uncertainty, the hesitation spoke volumes. He didn't know what to say, how to act, how to help her through this. She didn't blame him. No one could have prepared for this. In the days that followed, the hospital room became a revolving door of doctors, nurses, and well-meaning friends and family. But it was her fiancé's behavior that stood out the most. He had been there in the beginning, offering words of comfort, but as the days passed, he became distant. He was still there physically, but emotionally he seemed to pull away. It wasn't something he said directly, but the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, it was as if he was seeing her for the first time, and the person he saw was not the woman he had fallen in love with. She saw it in his eyes, the fear, the confusion, and the uncertainty. He didn't know how to handle her new reality, and it was clear that it was too much for him to process. It was a week after the accident when he finally said the words she had feared. He had come to visit her, sitting beside her hospital bed, his face tired, his hands fidgeting nervously. She had expected comfort, a reassurance that everything would be okay, that they would get through this together. But what he said was nothing like that. "I don't think I can do this," he said quietly, almost as if he was afraid of the words coming out of his mouth. She looked at him, not understanding at first. Her mind was still foggy, her emotions all over the place. "What do you mean?" "I don't think I can marry you." "Not like this," he said, his voice breaking. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt her chest tighten, her breath catching in her throat. She had known things had changed, that things were difficult, but she hadn't expected this. Not from him, not from the man who had promised to love her forever. "I don't know if I can be with someone who needs so much help," he continued, his voice filled with a mix of guilt and confusion. "I don't know how to deal with this." She felt the tears begin to well up, but she didn't let them fall. She didn't want to show him how much it hurt. "You don't have to do anything," she said, her voice shaking. "I just need your love. That's all," but it wasn't enough. It never was. He seemed to be pulling away more and more every day. The love that once seemed so strong, so unwavering, was now tinged with doubt. And then the unthinkable happened. He left. He didn't just leave the hospital room, he left her life. He walked away from the woman he had promised to love, from the future they had built together. Her heart broke in a way she hadn't known was possible. She had always believed in love, in the idea that two people could face anything together no matter what. But now she was left alone, not only with her physical pain but with the emotional scars of abandonment. She felt worthless, as if the person she had once been was no longer enough to keep someone by her side. The days that followed were a blur of endless hospital visits, physical therapy sessions, and well-meaning but often awkward visits from family and friends. People didn't know how to act around her anymore. She could see the discomfort in their eyes, the way they hesitated before speaking, unsure of what to say or how to behave. She had once been the center of attention, the life of the party, but now she felt like an outsider in her own life. Her body was changing in ways she couldn't control. She was growing weaker, the muscles in her legs atrophying from lack of use. Her independence was slipping away and she hated it. She had always been the type of person who prided herself on being strong, on being able to handle anything life threw her way. But now she was forced to rely on others for the simplest tasks. It was humiliating. And yet in the midst of the pain there was a part of her that refused to give up. She couldn't let this be the end of her story. She had to find a way to live again, to rebuild herself from the ashes of her former life. But how? How could she do that when she had been rejected by the one person who had promised to stand by her? As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, she slowly started to piece together a new life. She began attending therapy not just for her body, but for her soul. She learned how to navigate the world in a wheelchair, how to find her strength again, but it wasn't easy. She fought with her own demons, questioning her worth, questioning her ability to ever be loved again. It wasn't until one day, while sitting in a park near her home, that she met him. The park was peaceful, a quiet refuge from the noise of her life. She came there often now, seeking solace in the stillness, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft chirping of birds. It was the one place where she didn't feel the eyes of others on her, judging, pitying, wondering what had happened to the woman who once had it all. She liked to sit on a bench by the small pond, watching the water ripple gently, her thoughts drifting as aimlessly as the leaves floating on the surface. It was here, in the silence, that she could almost forget about her wheelchair, about her broken dreams, about the man who had walked away. She had always loved this park. Before the accident, it was where she and her fiancé had spent many weekends, strolling hand in hand, talking about their future. The memories of those days were bittersweet now. They lingered like ghosts in the corners of her mind, reminding her of everything she had lost. But she didn't want to dwell on that anymore. She couldn't. She had to find a way to move forward. It was on one of those quiet afternoons when the world seemed to be holding its breath that she met him. She didn't expect it, didn't look for it, but sometimes life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. He was sitting on the bench next to hers reading a book. She noticed him right away, not because of anything striking about his appearance, but because of the way he seemed so focused, so absorbed in what he was reading, as though nothing else in the world mattered. His presence was calming, like a steady anchor in a sea of uncertainty. She glanced at him briefly, unsure whether to acknowledge him or simply continue with her own thoughts. But he surprised her by speaking first. "Lovely day, isn't it?" he said with a smile that reached his eyes, the kind of smile that felt genuine, not forced. She wasn't used to strangers talking to her, at least not in the way he did. Most people she encountered these days treated her as though she were fragile, like a piece of delicate glass that might break at the slightest touch. But this man didn't look at her like that. He didn't see her wheelchair. He just saw her. "It is," she replied, her voice softer than usual. She hadn't spoken much in the past few months. The words always seemed to get stuck in her throat, tangled with the emotions she could never quite express. But something about him made it easier to speak. They sat in silence for a while, the soft murmur of the world around them the only sound. Eventually he closed his book and turned toward her. There was a kindness in his eyes, a warmth that made her feel strangely at ease. "I'm sorry if I'm being too forward," he said, "but you seem like someone who could use a friend." She blinked, taken aback by his words. She had never seen this man before, didn't know him at all, and yet in that moment she felt as though he could see right through her, straight to the heart of her pain. "I'm okay," she said, though it was a lie. She wasn't okay, not by a long shot, but she wasn't sure how to explain the mess inside her, the jumble of emotions that no one seemed to understand. He gave her a thoughtful look, as though he could sense the layers of sadness she was trying to hide. He didn't press her, though. He simply sat beside her, his presence calm and steady, like a rock in a storm. Over the next few weeks, they ran into each other several more times. At first, it was nothing more than small talk, pleasantries exchanged in the park. But with each conversation, she began to feel something shift inside her. There was something comforting about him, something that made her feel less alone. He wasn't like the people she had grown used to, those who whispered behind her back or avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. He treated her like a person, not a charity case or someone to be pitied. His name was Michael, and he was a single father. He had a daughter, a little girl of 7 and a son who was 4. His life was full of challenges. His job as a mechanic kept him busy, and his children required constant care and attention. He didn't have time for much else. But there was a quiet strength about him, an easy way he carried himself that made her feel like she could trust him, like he might understand in a way others didn't. As their conversations grew longer, she learned more about him. He had been through his own hardships, struggles of a different kind, but struggles nonetheless. He had lost his wife a few years ago to a sudden illness, and since then, he had been raising his children on his own. Life had never been easy for him, but he had found a way to keep going. He was a man who had learned to adapt, to keep moving forward even when everything seemed impossible. She found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone else. She talked about her accident, about the pain she felt not just in her body but in her heart. She talked about the man who had left her, the one who couldn't handle the changes in her life. She didn't know why she told him these things. It just felt natural, like he was someone she could trust with her deepest fears and regrets. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel judged. Michael listened quietly, never interrupting, never offering pity. He simply listened. His presence a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone in this. He didn't try to fix her, didn't offer advice. He just showed up day after day, ready to listen when she needed him to. It was something she hadn't realized she needed until it was right in front of her. The more they talked, the more she began to realize something. She was starting to feel alive again. The dark cloud that had hung over her for so long, the one that had made her feel like she was invisible, was beginning to lift. She wasn't sure what to make of it or what it meant for her future. But she knew one thing for sure: this man, this single father with the tired eyes and the gentle smile, had awakened something inside her that she thought was gone forever. She didn't know where it would lead, or if it was even meant to lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe life wasn't over. Maybe there was still a chance for happiness. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to love again. Days turned into weeks, and still they continued to meet. The park became their place, a quiet sanctuary where they could talk, laugh, and share their thoughts. At first, the conversations had been light, surface-level exchanges. But now they were diving deeper, talking about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. She had never expected to connect with someone this way again, certainly not after everything that had happened. She learned more about him with every meeting. Michael was a man who had been through loss, a loss that had shaped him, but not broken him. He had loved his wife deeply, and losing her had shattered him in ways he didn't always know how to express. But what impressed her most wasn't his sorrow. It was how he had picked up the pieces and kept moving forward for the sake of his children. He was a father first, always putting his kids' needs before his own. His love for them was evident in everything he did, and in the way he spoke about them. He never complained about the challenges he faced. Instead, he focused on the joy they brought him. He didn't want pity, and that was something she admired about him. He understood that life wasn't always fair, but it was still worth living. She too shared more about herself, about the woman she used to be before the accident. She told him about her dreams, her ambitions, and how all of it had come crashing down in an instant. She didn't mention the pain as much as she could have. It wasn't that she was hiding it. It was simply that it didn't seem necessary anymore. With him, there was no need to explain herself. He understood the unspoken parts of her. He didn't need to be told how hard things were. He could see it in her eyes and the way her body moved. He accepted her without needing to be reminded that she wasn't the same person she once was. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel like she was just a broken version of herself. When she was with him, she felt like a whole person again. It was almost like magic how effortlessly they connected. She had been afraid that the man she used to be, the woman who danced freely at parties, the one who planned her wedding with dreams in her eyes, had disappeared forever. But with him, she found pieces of her old self coming back to life. She laughed more than she had in months. He had a way of making her feel like she wasn't defined by her disability, but by who she was as a person. One afternoon, after another easy conversation about nothing in particular, Michael asked her a question that caught her off guard. It wasn't the kind of question he had asked before, something more personal, more revealing. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, his voice gentle. She looked at him, unsure of how to answer. She had thought about the future, of course, but it felt so uncertain. The life she had imagined for herself seemed like a distant memory, something unreachable. The idea of having a future, of being loved again, of maybe finding happiness after all of this, seemed too far out of reach. "I think about it," she said slowly, "but it's hard. I don't know what the future holds for me. I thought I knew once, but now everything feels uncertain." Michael nodded thoughtfully as if he understood. He didn't push her to elaborate. Instead, he simply said, "I think you're stronger than you realize." His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. She hadn't considered herself strong, not really. She had spent so much time thinking of herself as fragile, as someone who had been broken by the accident. But hearing him say that, hearing him believe in her strength, made her question the way she saw herself. She began to think more about the future, not as a dark, uncertain place, but as something that was still hers to shape. Perhaps it wouldn't look like she had once imagined, but maybe that was okay. Maybe there was still a way forward, even if it was different from the path she had planned. Over time, their bond deepened. She found herself looking forward to their meetings, not just because they offered a chance to talk, but because they made her feel alive. They would talk about anything and everything, sometimes about their favorite books or movies, other times about the struggles of raising children on your own, about the small victories that didn't seem to matter to anyone else but you. They didn't try to solve each other's problems. They simply listened, and in that listening, something important began to grow between them. One day, as they sat in the park watching the sun dip below the horizon, Michael turned to her with a serious expression on his face. "You know," he began, his voice a little hesitant, "I've been thinking." She looked at him, curious. "What about?" "About us," he said simply. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but the words made her nervous. She hadn't allowed herself to think about that, about a future with him, or even about the possibility of a future at all. But now, hearing him speak so openly, it was impossible to ignore the connection they shared. "What about us?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I don't want to rush things," he said, his eyes sincere. "But I think you're an incredible person, and I think I've gotten to know you in a way that feels real. I want to be there for you, for whatever that means. I want you to know you're not alone." Her breath caught in her throat. She had been so caught up in her own fears and doubts, she hadn't realized how much she had come to rely on him, how much she had come to care for him. But hearing him say this, hearing him offer her not just his friendship but something more, something deeper, made her heart swell with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I'm not sure what I'm capable of giving right now. I've been through a lot, and I'm still figuring things out." Michael smiled gently, as if he understood completely. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying I'm here. I want to be part of your life, however that looks. And I don't need anything in return. I just want to see you happy again." His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. She had never been promised something so pure, so unselfish before. And in that moment, she realized just how much he had already given her. His time, his attention, his care. He didn't ask for her to be someone she wasn't. He simply accepted her for who she was. She smiled softly, the warmth of his words filling her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she could open herself to the possibility of something more. Maybe she could find happiness again, not in the way she had once imagined, but in a new way, a way that was built on trust, understanding, and kindness. Over time, their connection grew deeper, and so did her feelings for him. She had never imagined she would be here, sitting with someone again, sharing her thoughts and feeling as though life wasn't just a series of obstacles anymore. But with him, it felt different. He had become her constant, his presence steady and unwavering like a lighthouse guiding her through the storm. There was something so genuine about him, so kind, that it made her question why she had ever doubted the possibility of finding love again. At first, she had been cautious. She didn't want to get too close, didn't want to risk getting her heart broken again. After everything that had happened with her fiancé, she couldn't bear the thought of opening up to someone only to have them walk away when things got difficult. But Michael was different. He didn't act out of obligation, and he never made her feel like a burden. He wasn't there because he felt sorry for her. He was there because he genuinely wanted to be. Their days in the park had turned into a regular routine. They would meet a few times a week, sometimes to talk, other times to sit in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. She found herself looking forward to their time together, feeling lighter every time they spoke. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping romantic moments, it was about the quiet, everyday things. The way he listened to her without interrupting, the way he asked how her day had been, even if it was the same as the day before. He made her feel like she mattered. One afternoon, as they sat side by side on the same bench they had shared countless times before, Michael's voice broke the silence. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about how you weren't sure if you were ready for anything more." She turned to him, the words from their previous conversation fresh in her mind. She remembered feeling vulnerable when she admitted that she wasn't sure if she could give anyone the love they deserved, not when she was still piecing herself together. But his reaction had been kind and patient. He hadn't pushed her, and he hadn't made her feel like she was failing at something she didn't fully understand herself. "You said you weren't sure if you were ready to move forward," he said gently, his eyes meeting hers. "And I understand that. I really do. But I think you're stronger than you realize. You've been through so much already, and you've come out the other side still fighting." She felt a lump form in her throat. He was right. She had been through more than she ever thought she could endure. But she was still here. She had survived the heartbreak of losing her fiancé, the devastation of her injury, the crushing loneliness that followed. And now here she was, sitting with a man who made her feel seen, who didn't just focus on what was broken in her life, but on what was still whole. "I don't know what I'm doing, Michael," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can love again. I don't know if I'm ready to be open, to trust again. I don't even know if I deserve it." He took her hand in his touch warm and reassuring. "You deserve all of it," he said softly. "And if you're not ready yet, that's okay. But don't sell yourself short. You've been through so much and you're still standing. I admire that more than you'll ever know." Her heart fluttered at his words. She had never expected to hear something like that again. After her fiancé left, she had believed that maybe she wasn't worthy of love anymore, that maybe the best parts of her had been lost in the chaos of her new life. But Michael, with his kind eyes and unspoken understanding, was showing her that maybe that wasn't true. Maybe love wasn't about perfection or never facing hardship. Maybe it was about finding someone who would stand by you, even when things were difficult. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe there was still a chance for happiness, for love. Maybe it wouldn't look like what she had originally planned, but that didn't mean it couldn't be beautiful in its own way. As the days passed, they continued to meet, and her feelings for him continued to grow. They shared stories of their past, of what had shaped them into the people they were now. She told him about the little things she had loved before the accident, the way the sun felt on her face during summer afternoons, the smell of fresh flowers in the air, and the way her heart used to race whenever she thought about her wedding day. She told him about the hopes and dreams she had once held close, the life she thought she would have, and how all of that seemed so far away now. And Michael, he shared his own stories, about his children, about the struggles he faced raising them on his own. He told her about his late wife, how much he had loved her and how losing her had left a hole in his heart that he didn't know how to fill. But he also told her about how his children had given him purpose, how they had been his reason for getting out of bed every morning, even when the world felt too heavy to carry. They both had scars, but they also had strength. And somehow in each other's company, they had begun to heal. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Michael turned to her and said something that took her completely by surprise. "I know we haven't been doing this for long," he began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "But I feel like I've known you forever. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't want to rush anything. But I just wanted you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. She hadn't realized just how much she had come to depend on him, how much she had come to care for him until he said those words. She had been afraid to let herself feel anything for fear of being hurt again. But with him it felt safe. He wasn't asking for anything more than her trust, and that was something she could give. "I'm not ready to make any promises," she said softly, "but I want to be here, with you. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm willing to figure it out." Michael smiled, his eyes bright with understanding. "That's all I need to hear." And in that moment she realized something important. She didn't need to have everything figured out right away. She didn't need to know what the future held or how everything would fall into place. All she needed was to take things one step at a time, to allow herself to be open to whatever might come next. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the strength to open her heart again. Weeks went by and life seemed to settle into a rhythm. She had grown more comfortable with the idea of being with Michael, not just as a friend, but as something more. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. There were no grand gestures or dramatic moments. Instead, their relationship was built on something simple: trust, understanding, and the quiet joy of being together. She had begun to share more of her life with him, her hopes, her fears, the parts of herself that she hadn't allowed anyone to see for a long time. And he, in turn, had opened up to her in ways she hadn't expected. They talked about their children, their pasts, their dreams for the future. He was the kind of person who didn't need to speak in grand declarations to express his feelings. Everything he did, every word he said, came from a place of genuine care. He wasn't in it for anything other than the connection they shared. And that was something she had never known before. She had always wondered if love was still possible for her. After everything that had happened, after the heartbreak and the loss, it seemed like an impossible dream. But with Michael, it felt real. He never expected her to be anyone other than who she was. He didn't see her as the broken woman with a disability. He saw her as a person, someone worth loving, someone worth being there for, and that made all the difference. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip behind the horizon, Michael turned to her with a thoughtful look in his eyes. They had been talking about their plans for the future, discussing the things they wanted to do, the places they wanted to visit. She had never really thought about the future before, not in the way she did now. For the first time, it felt like there was something to look forward to. "You know," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about taking things one step at a time." She looked at him, unsure of where he was going with this. He had always been patient with her, always willing to move at her pace. But there was something in his tone now that made her feel like something was about to change. "I've been thinking about how we've come so far," he continued, his voice steady. "And I know it's not always easy. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I don't want you to feel like you have to carry all of this alone. I want to be by your side through all of it." Her heart skipped a beat. The sincerity in his words, the way he spoke as though he truly meant it, was overwhelming. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to be so open with his feelings, but there it was, plain as day, the truth of his intentions, the depth of his commitment. "I don't know what the future holds either," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion, "but I know that I'm ready. I'm ready to be with you, to take things one step at a time to see where this goes." He smiled, a gentle smile that reached his eyes, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't a promise for forever, not yet, but it was a promise to be there, to be present, to move forward together. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. As the days went on, their bond grew stronger. They spent more time together, going on small outings, enjoying simple pleasures like walks in the park, visits to the local cafe, and late-night talks under the stars. She had never realized how much she missed these little moments, these quiet interactions that made life feel rich and full. With Michael, everything felt different. It was as though the weight of her past was slowly lifting, replaced by a new sense of possibility. But it wasn't just about the time they spent together. It was about the way he made her feel. He made her feel valued, loved, and respected. He didn't focus on what she couldn't do. He focused on what she could do. He encouraged her to try new things, to push past the limitations she had placed on herself. And as a result, she began to see herself in a new light. One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet cafe, Michael reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, comforting, and for a moment, everything else in the world seemed to fade away. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "I know we've only been together for a little while, but I can't help how I feel. I care about you. A lot." Her heart fluttered at his words. She had known for a while now that her feelings for him had grown into something more. But hearing him say it out loud made everything feel so real. She had never been one to rush into things, but with him, It felt right. "I care about you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and then, without warning, he did something that took her completely by surprise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught in her throat as he opened it, revealing a simple, delicate ring. It wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "I don't have all the answers," he said, his voice a little shaky, "but I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a future with you. Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Her mind raced, her heart pounded in her chest. She had never expected this. She had never expected to find someone who would accept her for who she was, who would love her despite everything that had happened. But here he was, offering her his love, his commitment, his future. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, her heart overflowing with emotions she couldn't put into words. She had been afraid for so long, afraid that love was something she would never have again. But Michael had shown her that love was still possible, that it could still be beautiful even in the face of pain and loss. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." The moment the words left her lips, a wave of relief washed over her. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to know what the future held. All she needed was to trust in the love they had, in the bond they had built. Together they would face whatever came next, one step at a time. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his smile wide and genuine, and in that moment everything felt perfect. She wasn't the same woman she had been before the accident, and neither was he the same man he had been before meeting her. But together they were stronger, more resilient. And together they would build a future full of love, hope, and the promise of better days ahead. Life after the proposal was different. In the best way. Every day felt brighter, more full of promise. She had never thought she would feel like this again, like she was walking into a future she could be excited about. It wasn't about the wedding, not just about the celebration, but about the life they were going to build together. The moments they shared, the simple acts of kindness, the conversations, the laughter, it was all part of something bigger, something that felt so much more real than anything she had ever imagined. The planning was a mix of joy and challenge. The wedding itself was never something she had envisioned as elaborate or grand. It wasn't about the dress or the venue, it was about them, about what they had gone through and what they had become because of it. She wanted a ceremony that reflected their journey, one that honored both of their pasts and the future they were beginning to create together. But even as she found joy in the little details, there were still moments of doubt. She couldn't help but worry sometimes. It was hard not to. She thought back to her previous experience, to the man who had left her when things got hard, and she wondered if she was making a mistake. She feared that this was all too good to be true, that maybe in the end she would be left feeling broken again. But every time those doubts crept in, Michael was there to remind her why they were doing this. He was patient, understanding, never pressuring her. He listened when she voiced her fears, and he reassured her with his steady presence. He didn't need to promise her that everything would be perfect, but he promised that he would always be there. That was all she needed. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with excitement, but also with a quiet sense of peace. Michael's calm, steady nature seemed to balance out her more anxious moments. She knew that, with him by her side, they could face anything together. There was no rush. No need to get everything right. It wasn't about perfection. It was about love, trust, and the bond they had forged over time. Their small family, his children and her family, came together to help with the preparations. It wasn't a grand affair, but that was what made it feel so right. It was intimate, surrounded by the people who had supported them through everything. There was a quiet joy in seeing Michael with his children, watching him navigate the world of parenting with such care and thoughtfulness. He had been through so much, but his love for his children was unwavering. And that love extended to her. She could see it in the way he interacted with her, in the way he made her feel seen and valued. As the day of the wedding approached, she began to feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't about the ceremony or the vows. It was about the commitment they were making to each other, the decision to face the world together, no matter what came their way. The love they had was real, solid, and based on something deeper than fleeting attraction. It was built on understanding, respect, and the shared experience of overcoming adversity. She had spent so much of her life wondering if she would ever find love again. She had wondered if she would ever be worthy of it after everything that had happened. But now standing here, she realized that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about finding someone who saw you for who you were. Someone who could stand with you in your darkest moments and still choose to love you. On the morning of the wedding, she woke up feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. She had always imagined this day in a different way, dreamed of walking down the aisle with her family cheering her on, her fiancé waiting for her at the altar. But now the reality was different. She was sitting in a quiet room, surrounded by the people who had supported her the most as they helped her prepare for this day. She wasn't going to walk down the aisle, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was there, that she was going to marry the man who had shown her what true love looked like. Her family was there with her, helping her get ready. Her mother was by her side, adjusting her dress, her hands gentle but steady. Her father, usually a man of few words, gave her a quiet smile, his eyes filled with pride. They had both been through their own struggles, but now they were here, celebrating this moment with her. It was all so surreal. She had spent so many months feeling like life had taken everything from her. But now, in this moment, it felt like life was giving her back something precious. As the ceremony began, she was filled with a calm that she hadn't expected. It wasn't perfect. There were little glitches here and there. Her wheelchair getting stuck on the edge of the carpet, a stray tear that she quickly wiped away. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the feeling in her heart as she looked up and saw Michael standing there, waiting for her. His smile was soft but full of love, and in that moment, she knew that everything they had been through had led them to this. As she wheeled down the aisle, the tears in her eyes were not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy she felt in that moment. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't the same woman she had been before, but she was stronger, braver, and more capable of love than she had ever thought possible. And the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle? He loved her, not in spite of what had happened to her, but because of it. He loved her for who she was, who she had become, and that made all the difference. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. The words they exchanged, the vows they made were heartfelt and honest. There was no pretense, no grand promises. Just two people who had found each other in the midst of pain and had chosen to walk through life together. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the journey and the love that had blossomed between them despite everything they had been through. As they exchanged rings, Michael's voice cracked with emotion. "I promise to love you, to cherish you, and to stand by you no matter what. I will be with you through all the highs and lows. I will be your partner, your friend, and your biggest supporter. I will love you always." She smiled, her heart full. "I promise to be there for you, to love you with all of my heart. I will stand beside you through everything. I will share my life with you, and I will choose you every day." And with those simple words, they became husband and wife. As they walked out of the ceremony, hand in hand, surrounded by their friends and family, she realized that this was the beginning of something beautiful. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was her life. And it was a life full of love, of understanding, and of